So I think that's a really great insight. And if you know about what that edge is, then you can play around and create a strategy around that. And yeah, so that's pretty cool. And Peter, if I may ask you on carry on this question on that. So, what are the different edges that you have seen, especially from the data-driven side as well as from elsewhere? The edges that the institutions or the professional traders that you would have dealt with or you dealt with day in, day out, I think, at Pack. So, so what are those kind of edges that one should explore?
Yeah. I mean, there are different approaches that you can take to this, right? And you highlighted data. Data is, of course, one way of getting an edge, and you can definitely see early days. I think it's probably like 15 years ago. You sort of had the term sort of pop up where you started talking about data hunters, right? You don't really talk about data hunters anymore because a lot of the data space, alternative data space, has become a little bit more commoditized. So you have catalogs today that sort of shows these are the types of categories of data that you can have. Here are the providers and so on. So it's become a little bit more commoditized, but you could see some of the cutting edge firms, data hungry companies 10, 15 years ago were hiring data hunters that would go to conferences and sort of find that little new data provider that was popping up, but also try to go to other places, not just conferences where the data got presented to many people, but really just trying to hunt down companies that may have data that they haven't started thinking about yet selling into finance. And then they would go in and say, hey, if you make this data set available, we would buy it. So there was clearly sort of this data, being fast on onboarding data. Then there's another edge, which is more in technology, right? And technology is not just about speed. Of course, that speed game was very big at a time, but only one can be first, right? So it's a very expensive thing to play.
Mhm.
And their data generally is for me a better play because it's a competition not on speed but on smarts, right?
Mhm.
So the edge can also come from a sort of a being creative perspective with data, right? But I would say technology for sure is important. And if we sort of take aside the speed component, say, okay, let's ignore that, then it's more about scaling. How do I build infrastructure that can scale? Because it may be that I'm not the best one at analyzing any individual data set, but I can analyze a lot more than anyone else. So when
Mhm.
I start to combine data sets together, I get an edge. So you have seen some of the early firms that says, you know what, how I onboarded 100 new data sets this year. Now I want to scale and build infrastructure such that next year I'm going to onboard 500 data sets, and the year after I'm going to onboard 1,000 data sets. So I will out onboard everyone
Mhm.
else from a data perspective. And then the actual alpha strategies that they may be building on those data sets can be relatively simple. They just sort of take more of this inspired machine learning based approach where you do a lot of weak learners and then you combine that into a strong alpha in the end, right? So that can also be a place. Then you have, and then you sort of go into an edge of saying, how do I combine these data sets? That's really where I can have an edge, where I have more sophisticated sort of my top talent sitting as PMs, figuring out to say, if I combine this data set, this alpha with this alpha, I get something even better out. And then I put a risk management layer on top and all of this sort of stuff. You get into some really strong competitive strategies that can be quite robust because they're made up of many different data sets. So I will say that, and then the last thing I will say, not to keep going forever,
Please, please.
is what I mentioned before. Working in finance and working as a quant, building strategies, it is very much a creative process, right? And that's also where the fun things are. It's creative around what type of methodologies you want to apply from, let's say, a machine learning perspective, but also how do I come up with these great hypotheses that Kyle was talking about? Because it is correct. It's always a good place to start with an objective, with a hypothesis, and then figure out how to solve it from there.
Yeah, yeah. And that's very helpful. Yeah, I think, and as you rightly mentioned, there are multiple edges which are there. There are some which are aligned more. So most of them would be aligned to technology and data, since we are focusing on the quant space here, and that's where the world has progressively been moving more and more towards. And I think technology, both sides are there. One is for the speed of execution. So, which rightly said, I think we also come from the HFT background, and we have seen the journey from few 10 microsecond to single digit microsecond using your in-house, tools. And today it's all in the game of nanoseconds and double digit nanoseconds also in many cases using FPGA tools and stuff. So, which is going to a different direction from the HFT point of view from when it comes to the speed and even latency arbitrage kind of strategies where you're doing a microwave and long wave that is coming in, so for communication. So a lot of stuff which is going heavy duty, and if you look technology purely as the from the perspective of speed of execution, but when it comes to analyzing data and using technology as a play for your quantitative methods, for your improving the models and integrating different kind of data sets and trying to build an edge using that, I think that's pretty much something which even individual traders, professional traders, they can use and play on that and expand on that edge. So,
Nitish, if I could just come
yes,
in,
yes,
one
yes.
of the main things that has happened over the last 10, 15 years, building on what Peter said, was democratization of information, which was not available earlier. Like, if you look at 10 years ago, most
Mm,
retail participants or most, entry-level institutional participants also did
mm,
not have access to the kind of information,
yeah,
data, technology, the means and the know-how of how to deploy quantitative strategies.
mm,
But today, thanks to various different tools, enough and more information available, and the community which has gotten built, there
yeah,
are data available, there is know-how available, there is a community which has gotten built, which allows people to, collaborate and come out with various different strategies for themselves.
yeah,
And that actually helps in one way because, people who, you always have people who you can discuss with, but it also has a negative context because everybody cannot have the same edge,
yeah.
because then you will have to,
Then
if
it's gone.
there's
Yeah,
one edge which somebody has, then if
yeah.
you're discussing it within the community, then you will also have to be realistic that everybody is going to have that edge which you had now. So you will
Mm,
have to constantly keep improving on what the strategy that you had initially built. So it's no longer static. It's
yeah.
so dynamic that every single market movement would require you to adopt to newer strategies.
Yes, absolutely. I think I fully agree with you. And the way data analytics has evolved, and I think Python had a great role to play in this. I think the free and open source movement and the cloud infrastructure that has become so easily available thanks to the big tech here, AWS, Azure, and Google, all of them. I think it has been a great role because I remember 15 years back, it would have been difficult to test a serious strategy. You need a server. If you need to go and buy a server, you're going to be down few $1,000s, and that would take away probably 80-90% of the audience who can try in the individual trader space. And today with cloud and all, you can actually pay as you go, and you can try these things. So I think that has been quite positive. So